Yet a woman worth $3 billion grabbed a stranger's wrist in the rain and whispered 4 words that would destroy everything she'd built and save everything she didn't know she needed. She thought she was asking him to let her die. He thought she was asking him to hurry. Neither of them was right. And what Marcus Johnson chose to do next in the mud in the dark with his bare hands and nothing else didn't just pull one woman from a wrecked car. It pulled an entire empire toward the truth. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and follow along. You will not want to miss what comes next. The rain was the kind that didn't fall, it attacked. It came sideways off Route 9, thick and cold, the kind of November storm that made men grip their steering wheels with both hands and pray the white lines on the asphalt didn't disappear entirely. Most drivers that night had the good sense to slow down, pull over, let the worst of it pass. Vanessa Cole was not most drivers. She had a board call at 7 in the morning, a red-eye flight to cancel, and a litigation report sitting on the passenger seat that her general counsel said she needed to read before midnight. She was already 40 minutes behind schedule because the dinner in Boston had run long. Senator Hargrove liked to talk, and you didn't cut off Senator Hargrove, and now the storm was cutting into the last margin she had left. She pressed the accelerator. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. 1 second, maybe 2. That was all it took. When the rear tire caught the edge of the shoulder, the part that wasn't road anymore, the part that dropped 6 inches without warning, the SUV didn't spin slowly. It lurched. Hard. The steering wheel wrenched itself out of her hands like something alive. And then the guardrail was there. And then it wasn't. And then Vanessa Cole was no longer moving forward. She was moving sideways. And then she was upside down. And then she was nothing. The silence after a crash is the part nobody talks about. Not the impact people talk about the impact. The sound of metal folding glass shattering the world rotating in directions it was never supposed to rotate. People talk about that. But the silence after? That's something else entirely. Vanessa came back to herself in pieces. Sound first rain hammering a surface that was now above her. Then smell gasoline. Something burnt the copper penny taste of blood already pooling in the back of her throat. Then pain, not sharp, not yet, but present. A deep, dull, wrong kind of pressure in her chest, like something inside had shifted to a place it didn't belong. She was hanging. Seatbelt still engaged. The SUV rested on its roof in the ditch below the guardrail, and she was suspended inside it like something caught in a net. She tried to breathe. Couldn't. Tried again. Half a breath, maybe less. Whatever was happening in her chest, a rib, maybe more than one. It was making the act of breathing feel like swallowing broken glass. Move, she told herself. Get out. You've handled worse than this. She hadn't, actually. But Vanessa Cole had been telling herself lies with authority for 47 years, and the habit didn't stop just because a guardrail had. She reached for the door handle. Her left arm responded. Her right arm didn't, not fully. Pain flared from shoulder to elbow when she tried to extend it, a white-hot signal she understood immediately. Broken, or close enough. She reached with her left hand instead. The door was caved inward. It wasn't opening. Outside, the rain kept attacking. Vanessa thought very clearly and without drama. I am going to die in this ditch on Route 9, and the last thing I read was a litigation summary. Then she heard footsteps. Marcus Johnson had been driving home from his second shift. Not his first, his second. He picked up the overnight security rotation at Mercy General 3 Thursdays a month because Maya's dance recital fees weren't going to pay themselves, and he'd promised her, sworn to her with a seriousness that 8-year-olds hold you to forever, that she would not miss her spring show. It cost $240. The shoes alone were $60. So, 2 shifts. Gaeta. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that coffee fixes, the kind that lives behind your eyes and in your lower back, and reminds you every morning that you are 35 years old, and doing the work of two parents with the income of one. He had 3 hours before Maya woke up, which meant 2.5 if he wanted any chance of making her breakfast before school, which he always wanted, because that was the part of the day when she still talked to him without an attitude, when she was still soft and half asleep and called him Daddy instead of Dad. He was doing the math on scrambled eggs versus cereal when his headlights caught the guardrail. Mom's broken. A section of it bent outward at an angle that guardrails were not supposed to bend. Skid marks on the wet asphalt still dark and fresh. He was past it before his brain fully registered what his eyes had seen, and then he was braking, pulling onto the shoulder, getting out before he'd made a conscious decision to get out. The rain hit him like a wall. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, flashlight on. He moved toward the broken guardrail and looked over the edge. The SUV was down in the ditch, on its roof, steam rising from what used to be the engine compartment. Marcus was already dialing 911. "This is Route 9 southbound, approximately mile marker 31, he said, "because military training doesn't leave you not even at midnight in the rain after a double shift, not even when you're scared. I have a single vehicle rollover in a ditch. Vehicle is on its roof. I'm going down to check for survivors. Send EMS now." The dispatcher started talking. Marcus pocketed the phone and went over the guardrail. Yay. He slid down the embankment on his heels, one hand gripping wet grass, the phone pressed against his thigh. The ground leveled out, and he was at the wreck, crouching, moving to the driver's side window, what remained of it. She was alive. He could see her breathing, or trying to. Suspended from the seatbelt, face angled toward the crumpled roof, eyes open and blinking slowly. Blood on her chin. Blood darkening her collar. "Hey." His voice was steady. He'd learned that somewhere between Fallujah and Fort Bragg, that your voice could be a medical tool. "Hey, I'm right here. I've got you. Can you hear me?" Her eyes found him. Even upside down, even through glass and rain and shock, the look in them was unmistakable. Pure, stripped-down terror. Not the kind people performed, the real kind. "I hear you," she said. Her voice came out fractured, like something was catching in the middle of it. Each word cost her. It hurts to breathe. I know it does." He was scanning. Eyes moving fast over everything he could see. Chest movement shallow, asymmetrical. Left side moving less than the right. The way her right arm hung wrong. The blood mouth, chin, small laceration above the eyebrow, nothing arterial that he could see. "Where's the pain? Can you point to it?" "Chest, left side. Something's..." She stopped, tried to breathe. Couldn't complete it. "Something's wrong. You've got a broken rib, maybe more than one. That's what's making it hard to breathe. It's going to keep feeling that way for a few minutes. I need you to stay calm and take small breaths. Small. Don't try for a big one." "How do you..." She stopped again, swallowed. "Who are you?" "Marcus. I was driving by. I called for an ambulance, they're coming. You're going to be okay. But I need you to keep talking to me." A pause. She was processing. Even in shock, even in pain, he could see it the way her eyes sharpened slightly, reassessing. Are you a doctor?" "No." "Then how do you know about..." Another fractured breath. "The ribs. Used to be a medic, a long time ago." He tried the door. Confirmed what he expected, completely collapsed, not opening, without jaws of life. He moved to the rear. The back window was gone, blown out on impact. "I'm going to come in through the back. Don't move. Don't try to turn. Just keep taking those small breaths." "Wait." He was already moving. The interior of the destroyed SUV smelled like leather and gasoline and copper. Marcus crawled through the broken rear window on his elbows, careful of the glass. Careful of the groaning frame around him. The vehicle was unstable. He could feel it shifting slightly, and the last thing either of them needed was for it to settle wrong. He got to her side and positioned himself so he could see her face. She was pale. the pallor that comes from blood pressure dropping. Her lips were a color he didn't like. "What's your name?" he asked. "Vanessa." "Vanessa. Good. Stay with me, Vanessa. EMS is coming. It's going to sound like forever right now, but they're coming." "My arm," she said. "I can't the right one." "I see it. Don't try to move it. We're going to leave it alone until the paramedics get here." She looked at him, really looked at him. And something shifted in her expression, some layer of CEO composure that she'd apparently maintained even while hanging upside down in a ruined car suddenly fell away. What was underneath it was something he recognized. He'd seen it before in a different country, on different faces, in different kinds of wreckage. People who understood suddenly and completely that they had no control. "Is it bad?" she asked. The directness of it surprised him. No cushioning, no leading up to it, just the straight question person to person. He met it the same way. "You've got significant chest trauma and likely multiple rib fractures. Your breathing is compromised. You've lost some blood. You're in shock." He paused. "But you're talking to me. Your color is holding. You're coherent. In my experience, those things matter." She absorbed this. Then, "In your experience. I spent 4 years in combat medicine. I've seen worse outcomes from injuries that looked less survivable." Something moved through her eyes. It might have been relief. It might have been something she didn't have a name for yet. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." Then she closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, something had changed again. Her voice dropped, and she said the words that would stay with Marcus for a long time afterward. "Please." Her fingers found his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone in her condition, desperate strong the way drowning people grab at anything solid. "Please, make it fast." He went still. Outside, the rain kept coming down. Somewhere on the road above them, he could hear the first distant wail of a siren still miles away. He looked at her. Looked at the way her eyes were pleading with him. Looked at the blood on her chin and the way every breath was a negotiation. And he understood in the way that men who have sat beside dying people understand these things, what she thought she was asking. She thought she was asking him to let her go quickly, to not make her fight if the fight was already lost, to give her the mercy of not pretending. Marcus Johnson had spent a significant portion of his adult life making choices in moments when choice felt impossible. He made one now. "No," he said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "No, that's not what's happening tonight." Her grip on his wrist tightened. "You said it's bad." "I said it's significant. I didn't say it was over." He placed his other hand over hers, not moving it, not removing it, just covering it. "I've been in worse than this with people who walked out. And you're going to walk out." "You don't know that." "No." He agreed. "I don't. But I know what giving up looks like, and it doesn't look like you." He met her eyes and held them. "So here's what I need you to do. Small breaths. Keep your eyes open. Talk to me. What do you do for work?" The question was so ordinary in the middle of everything extraordinary that she almost laughed. The sound it made wasn't a laugh, it was too broken for that, but it was close. "I run a company," she said. "What kind?" "Technology, infrastructure, mostly." A breath. Small, careful the way he'd told her. "About 4,000 employees." 4,000 people work for you." "Yes." "And not one of them is here right now." A pause. "No." "Then it's just us." His grip steadied. "And that's enough. Keep talking. Tell me about your company." The paramedics arrived 11 minutes later. To Marcus, it felt like 40. To Vanessa, it felt like 11, because he kept her talking every second of it about the company, about her board, about a conference in Singapore she'd been dreading for 3 weeks. Mundane, specific, real things. Things that kept her anchored to a future she hadn't stopped being in. When the paramedics came over the guardrail with lights and equipment and professional efficiency, Marcus gave them the handoff with the precision of someone who had done it before, vitals estimated injury assessment, mental status timeline. The lead paramedic, a woman named Rodriguez, glanced at him twice during the report. "You a medic?" she asked. "Used to be." "Good call on the breathing support, kept her from going into full shock." He stepped back and let them work. They stabilized Vanessa's neck, cut the seatbelt, lowered her carefully with practiced hands, got her on the backboard, got her up the embankment and into the ambulance with a speed that came from training and repetition and the particular kind of commitment that emergency workers carry in their bodies like a second skeleton. Before the ambulance doors closed, Vanessa turned her head. She found him standing at the edge of the light, rain-soaked hands loose at his sides. "Marcus!" she called. He moved closer. "I don't—" She stopped. Her voice was thin but clear. "I don't know how to do this. Say thank you for something this—" She couldn't finish. "You don't have to," he said. "Just breathe." The doors closed. The ambulance pulled away. Marcus stood in the rain for a moment longer than necessary, listening to the siren pull distance between them. Then he walked back up the embankment, got in his car, and drove home. Maya was still asleep when he got there. He stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her breathe in the quiet way of children who don't yet know that the world requires this much from a person. She had her mother's eyelashes. She always had. He went to the kitchen. He made scrambled eggs. Vanessa spent 9 days at Mercy General Hospital. Done? 4 broken ribs. A partially collapsed left lung pneumothorax, which explained everything about the way breathing had felt like drowning in the ditch. A fractured right radius. A concussion serious enough that they kept her for observation longer than she wanted, though wanting had temporarily been removed from her list of available options. She was not a patient person. She was not a... This was well documented. Her assistant Daniel had once kept a running note in his phone that he called "Things Vanessa Has Said to Doctors," which he planned to publish someday as a slim volume of dark comedy. Entries included, "I understand what rest means, I simply don't agree with it as a prescription," and "I'm not refusing discharge, I'm renegotiating the timeline," and the classic, "Please tell the attending that my schedule is not something he gets a vote on." On day 2, she fired off 14 emails from her hospital bed. On day 3, she tried to run a board call from the ICU step-down unit until a nurse named Patricia, a woman of approximately 60, who conveyed her feelings about this through eye contact alone, removed the phone from her hand with a calmness that brooked no debate. On day 4, Vanessa lay in the quiet of her room and thought about the man in the rain. Why? She'd asked Daniel to find out who he was. It hadn't taken long. The accident report listed him as a witness. The Mercy General employee directory, she was in Mercy General. The irony was not lost on her, confirmed to Marcus Johnson in the security department. Shift information. Hire date. Emergency contact. The emergency contact was listed under one name. Maya Johnson, daughter, age 8. Vanessa looked at that for a while. She'd been in business long enough to know what people wanted from her, what proximity to her meant financially. She'd been approached, flattered, maneuvered, and outright manipulated by people with far more sophistication than a hospital security guard. She understood incentive structures the way other people understood the weather as a constant something. You accounted for something you never fully trusted. But she kept coming back to the ditch. To the way he hadn't moved when she'd begged him to make it fast. To the way he'd said no with a certainty that wasn't unkind and wasn't soft, just certain. Like a door closing on something that wasn't going to be permitted. She'd told 4,000 employees what to do, and none of them had ever said no to her like that. She told Daniel to send flowers and a card. Standard gratitude. Appropriate. Then she told him to cancel it. She was going to handle this one herself. On day 7, Marcus was doing his security rounds on the 4th floor orthopedics neurology, the overflow rooms. when he turned a corner and almost walked into a woman in a hospital gown. IV pole in tow, moving down the hallway, with the careful determination of someone who had been told to rest and was choosing to interpret that instruction loosely. He recognized her immediately. She looked different than she had in the ditch, obviously. Cleaned up, bandaged correctly, color returned to her face. But the eyes were the same, sharp, assessing, the kind that moved across a room and categorized everything they landed on. She stopped walking when she saw him. He stopped walking too. For a moment, they just stood there, in the institutional light of the fourth-floor hallway, rain-soaked memory hanging between them in a place where it didn't quite fit. "You work here?" she said finally. It wasn't a question. "Security, yes ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am." Automatic. Then, "Sorry, that was..." She exhaled carefully, ribs still mending. "I've been looking for you." "I heard. The flowers." Daniel had told him about the canceled flowers, which he'd heard about from Patricia, who heard everything. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. I wanted to." She studied him. "You were a combat medic." "Long time ago. And now you're a security guard at the hospital where they brought me." "That's right." "That's..." She seemed to be deciding how to say the next part. "That's a significant gap." Marcus looked at her steadily. He knew what she was doing, reframe the implicit question. He'd been on the receiving end of it from people far less skilled at it than Vanessa Cole. The version that came from the well-meaning was usually some variation of a man with your abilities doing this job. What happened? "It's a job that lets me be home when my daughter gets off the bus," he said. Something happened in her expression. Quick and subtle, the particular movement of a face when it encounters something it wasn't prepared for. "How old is she?" Vanessa asked. The edge had gone out of her voice. Not gone entirely, he suspected the edge was structural part of the foundation, but reduced. 8. 9 in March. "What's her name?" "Maya." She said the name quietly, as if she were placing it somewhere. Then, "My offer stands. Whatever you need, salary, a position somewhere in my company, whatever would help. I appreciate it," Marcus said, "but I'm not interested in that." "Why not?" "Because you'd spend the rest of our acquaintance trying to figure out whether I did what I did because I'm a good person or because I was angling for something. And I'd spend it knowing that's what you were thinking." He paused. "That's not a relationship either of us wants." She stared at him. Then slowly the corner of her mouth moved in a direction that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the vicinity of one. "You're direct," she said. "I've got limited time. 2 shifts. Right, the bus." She adjusted the IV pole, looked at him for a long moment. "Okay, no offer. Can I at least know where you get coffee? I've been trying to break out of this floor for a week." Marcus looked at her, this billion-dollar woman in a hospital gown with a busted arm and a healing lung, and the audacity of someone who had clearly never once been told that the rules applied to her specifically. He thought about Maya, about scrambled eggs, about how tired he was. He said, "There's a machine on the 2nd floor that has a decent enough hot chocolate if you don't look at the ingredients list." That's the most depressing thing I've heard this week. "You rolled a car on Route 9. A beat. She laughed, a real one this time, short and genuine and slightly surprised, like it had gotten out before she could make a decision about it. "Fair," she said. He held out his arm. She took it. They walked to the elevator together, the security guard and the CEO, the single father and the woman who ran a company, both of them moving at the careful pace of someone who had recently learned that the world could tip without warning in the dark. Outside the hospital windows, the city continued its ordinary work. And something between them, neither one of them named it yet, began. The hot chocolate machine on the 2nd floor became a strange kind of ritual. It started accidentally, the way most things that matter do. Marcus ran his rounds. Vanessa escaped her floor with increasing boldness as her ribs healed. And twice more that week, they ended up in the same corridor, at the same odd hour, with the same unspoken agreement to pretend it was coincidence. The machine dispensed something that was technically hot and technically chocolate, and neither of them complained because the conversation was better than the drink anyway. She asked him questions. Not the polite kind, the real kind. The kind that came from someone who spent her life extracting information as a professional sport. "What's the hardest part?" she asked on the third evening, sitting in a chair she'd dragged from a waiting room, while he stood against the wall with his cup. "Of what?" "Doing this, after what you were doing before." He considered that. Not performing consideration, actually thinking, which she noticed because the men in her life had largely stopped doing that in her presence. "The first year," he said finally, "after my wife died. Maya was 5. I had to leave the medical track I was on because the hours didn't work for a single parent. And honestly," he stopped, looked at his cup. "Honestly, I needed something where my brain could turn off at the end of the shift, where I wasn't making life or death calls. I'd been making those for years, and I was tired of being the person other people's survival depended on. And then I crashed into a ditch." "Yeah." Something moved across his face. "Life has a sense of humor. Does it bother you that you were pulled back into it?" He thought about that for a long time. Long enough that she didn't rush him, which cost her something because Vanessa Cole's entire professional identity was built on filling silence. "No," he said at last. "Bothers me that I needed to be pulled back in to remember who I was before Maya. Before I started thinking survival was the same thing as living." She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with the expression of someone who had received information they intended to keep. 2 days later, she was discharged. Daniel arrived with a car service and a stack of folders she'd requested, and the kind of expressionless professionalism that meant he had opinions he was choosing not to share. Marcus was not on shift when she left. She had Daniel find out his phone number anyway. She texted him that evening. One sentence, no preamble. "The hot chocolate was terrible. Thank you for the company." He replied 4 hours later, which she assumed meant he'd been sleeping or on shift or both. "Get some rest. Your ribs are going to lie to you and tell you they're fine for about 3 days. They're not." She stared at that text for longer than she would have admitted to anyone. Then she put her phone down and picked up the litigation report she still hadn't finished reading. She put it down again. She picked up the phone. "How do you know when they're actually fine?" His answer came faster this time. "When you stop noticing them." Go. She thought about that. Then she thought about the fact that she was lying in her penthouse apartment in one of the most expensive buildings in Boston, and she hadn't once today not noticed her ribs. She hadn't once today not been aware of every breath as a negotiation, just like he'd said in the ditch. She'd been awake and alert, and in charge of her recovery and managing her inbox and rescheduling her board call, and she had not stopped noticing them for a single second. She thought maybe he wasn't only talking about ribs. She put the phone down. She didn't sleep for a long time. Over the following 3 weeks, the texts continued. Not constantly, neither of them was the type, but regularly. He'd send something brief about Maya. A spelling test she'd aced. A disagreement about whether hot dogs were sandwiches that had apparently consumed dinner entirely. She'd respond with something dry, and he'd match it, and then one of them would go quiet for a day, and the other wouldn't push. And somehow that rhythm suited them both without discussion. She sent a car once. Just showed up outside his apartment building on a Wednesday morning when she knew he was between shifts, a black car with a note that said she'd reserved a table at a restaurant downtown and that it wasn't a date and it wasn't a business proposal. It was lunch, and he could refuse if he wanted, but the reservation was in his name, if he changed his mind. He almost refused. He told himself he was going because it was close to the hospital and he had an errand nearby anyway. He was aware this was not a credible story. The restaurant was the kind of place where the menu didn't list prices, which Marcus registered the moment he walked in. The hostess took his coat without asking. The table Vanessa had reserved was in the back, quiet away from the windows, and Vanessa was already there, no phone in her hand, which he suspected cost her more than the meal. "You came," she said. "I had an errand nearby." She looked at him. She knew. He knew she knew. They both left it where it was. He sat down. For the first 20 minutes they talked about Maya. Then they talked about the company, not strategy, not the board, but what it had originally been. What she'd built it for before it became the thing it was now. She talked about it the way people talk about old photographs of themselves, with a mix of recognition and distance. And Marcus listened the way he'd learned to listen in medicine, not just to what people were saying, but to what they were working up the courage to say. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You just did." "Fair. Can I ask you another something?" "You're going to anyway." He put his glass down. "What do you actually like about running it? Not what it means. Not the impact or the revenue or the mission statement. What do you actually personally enjoy?" She opened her mouth. Then she closed it. He waited. "I like the solving," she said finally. "Not the managing, not the politics. The actual there's a problem here are the pieces, how do they fit? I was good at that. I'm still good at it. But somewhere in the last several years, I've spent more time managing the people who don't want the problem solved than I've spent actually solving it." She paused. "I haven't said that out loud before." "Why not?" "Because the people around me are paid to tell me I'm doing fine." "And I'm not. And you're not." She looked at him evenly. "That's the thing about you, Marcus. You're not paid to tell me anything. You're not scared of me. You're not trying to get something. It's—" She stopped. "It's disorienting, honestly." "I'll try to be more intimidating." She laughed, and it was the same laugh as in the hospital hallway, the one that got out before she could catch it. They stayed at the table for 2.5 hours. Marcus was late for his errand, which had never existed. He didn't mention it. On the sidewalk outside Vanessa's car was already waiting. She stopped at the door and turned back. "Maya?" she said. "Does she like soccer?" He blinked. Of the directions he'd expected this to go, that wasn't one of them. "Yeah, plays on a rec league. Why, I have a foundation event next month. We run a youth sports program. They're doing a showcase professional players coaching clinics. I have 2 extra spots." He studied her. "That's a long way from hot chocolate." "I'm an overachiever. It's a documented problem." Wow. He almost said no. The no was right there, ready, well practiced. He'd been saying a version of it for years to Dr. Mitchell, when she asked if he'd consider coming back to medicine to his mother, when she suggested he was hiding to himself at 3 in the morning, when Maya was asleep, and the apartment was too quiet. "I'll ask her," he said. "That's not a no." "That's not a no," he agreed. He walked to his car. He didn't look back, but he heard her get into hers, and for a second, just a second, the ordinary sound of a car door closing felt like something else, like a door opening. He drove home. Maya was at school. The apartment was quiet in the particular way of spaces that are only fully alive at certain hours, and Marcus stood in the kitchen and did not make scrambled eggs and did not turn on the television. He just stood there and felt the unfamiliar shape of something he hadn't felt in a long time. He was looking forward to something. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He called his mother. "You met someone," she said before he finished the second sentence. "I didn't say that." "Marcus Darnell Johnson, I have known you for 35 years. When you call me in the middle of the day for no reason, you met someone." It's complicated." "It's always complicated. Is she good?" He thought about the hospital hallway, about the text messages, about the way she'd sat across from him for 2.5 hours and not once checked her phone. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." Yeah. Then uncomplicate it. Mom. I know about the fear. I know about your heart. I know about Diane. His mother's voice was gentle, but it didn't pull its punches because she was his mother, and she'd earned the right not to. I also know that Diane would have had words for you living the way you've been living. Strong words. You know I'm right. He was quiet. Maya needs to see her father whole, his mother said. Not surviving, whole. He'd heard those words before. He'd said a version of them to Vanessa in the hospital. It was different receiving them. I know, he said. Good. Now go get some sleep before your shift. And Marcus. Yeah. Bring her to Sunday dinner when you're ready. I'll make the thing with the cornbread. He hung up. He stood in the quiet apartment. He thought about Diane, not the grief of her which he'd lived with long enough that it had changed shape, become something he carried differently, but the woman she had been. The way she'd looked at him on their first date, when he'd said something honest and unexpected, and she'd tilted her head and said, I wasn't ready for you to be like this. He'd asked her what she meant. She'd said, real, like she'd been expecting performance and gotten something else. He wondered what Vanessa saw when she looked at him. He suspected it was something similar. He went to sleep. He didn't dream, which was rare. Usually there was something fragments of the deployment, or Diane's face, or Maya at various ages cycling through like slides. But that afternoon, he slept clean and dark and full. And when he woke up, he felt something he could only describe as rested, which was different from having slept. Maya came home at 3:15 and dropped her backpack in the hallway with the precision of someone who had decided the hallway was its permanent home. Dad. Bag. He said without looking up from the counter. She retrieved the bag with theatrical suffering and hung it on its hook. Then she came into the kitchen and climbed onto the counter stool and looked at him with the particular intensity of an 8-year-old who has developed an opinion. You look different, she said. I look the same. You don't. She narrowed her eyes. She had Diane's eyes. She used them the same way. Something happened. I had lunch. With who? A friend. What friend? You don't have friends. I have friends. Name one that's not Coach Derek or somebody from the hospital. He set a plate of apple slices in front of her and said nothing. She ate an apple slice and continued watching him. Then, is it a girl? She's a grown adult woman. That means yes. Maya's expression shifted into something that was either approval or strategy. At 8, the line was thin. What's her name? Vanessa. What does she do? She runs a company. What kind of company? Technology. Infrastructure. Maya chewed thoughtfully. Is she nice? Marcus thought about the hospital hallway. About don't call me ma'am. About 2.5 hours at a restaurant with no phone on the table. She's working on it, he said. Maya nodded slowly, as if this were an acceptable assessment. Then she reached for another apple slice and said, with the devastating casualness of children delivering important verdicts, you should invite her to my soccer game. Marcus looked at his daughter. His daughter looked at him. I'll think about it, he said. That's not a no, she said. He stared at her. You been talking to... I don't know what you're talking about, she said, and slid off the stool and disappeared down the hallway. He stood at the counter. He was smiling. He hadn't noticed when it started. The foundation event was on a Saturday in late October, all the trees doing what New England trees do in October, performing their annual exit with maximum drama. Maya had decided within 48 hours of being told about the soccer clinic that this was the most important event of her life to date. She'd researched the coaches. She'd made a list of questions. She'd laid out her kit 3 days early. Vanessa met them at the entrance. She looked different outside the hospital, outside the context of power and litigation and boardrooms. She was dressed simply, dark jeans, a jacket her arm no longer in the splint, And she looked. Marcus thought like a person, not like a CEO, not like a woman managing a brand, like someone who had shown up to a place because she wanted to be there. Maya assessed her in 3 seconds flat. Children did this, conducted full character evaluations before adults had finished their first sentence. "You're Vanessa," Maya said. "I am, and you're Maya. I've heard good things." "What things?" "That you have strong opinions about hot dogs." Maya turned to her father with an expression of pure betrayal. Marcus kept his face entirely neutral. "They're sandwiches," Maya said firmly. "I think you might be right," Vanessa said. Maya decided visibly in real time that this was someone worth knowing. The three of them spent 4 hours at the event. Maya went through the coaching clinic with the focus of someone years older, and Marcus watched from the sideline, and Vanessa stood beside him, and they talked about nothing particularly important. The weather? A podcast. He'd mentioned a trip she'd taken to Seattle she hadn't enjoyed. And the conversation had the quality of something well-worn like furniture that had been arranged a long time ago and fit the room. At one point, Maya waved from the field and Vanessa waved back automatic without thinking, and then she seemed to register what she'd done and glanced at Marcus as if expecting something. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching Maya run. But he was smiling. Late in the afternoon, while Maya was getting an autograph from one of the coaches and Marcus was holding her jacket, Vanessa said quietly, "She's remarkable." "Yeah." "She looks at people like she's deciding something." "She is, always. Terrifying when she was 2, terrifying now. I assume it will be terrifying when she's 40. She gets it from you." He glanced at her. "You do it too," Vanessa said. "Look at people like you're deciding something. Most people are just waiting for their turn to talk. You're actually deciding." He thought about what to say. Then he said, "What am I deciding right now?" She held his gaze. She didn't look away. He'd noticed. She never looked away, that she did everything with a kind of full presence that came, he suspected, from spending years in rooms where looking away was a concession. "I don't know," she said. "But I think it's something." Maya came running back across the grass. At that exact moment, jacket snatched from Marcus's hands before she reached them, cheeks flushed, vibrating with the specific energy of a child who has had the best day of her recent life. "Can we get pizza?" she demanded. "We just had lunch," Marcus said. "That was hours ago." "That was 2 hours ago. I played soccer. I burned calories." She turned to Vanessa with the confidence of someone who had already identified her best ally. "You want pizza, right?" Vanessa looked at Marcus. He looked back. "There's a place nearby," he said. "Not a surrender. A decision." They got pizza. They sat in a booth in a neighborhood place that had been there since the 80s, the kind where the booths had duct tape on the corners, and the menu was laminated, and the pizza came out in 8 minutes, because they'd been doing it the same way for 40 years. Maya sat across from both of them and ate 2 slices and talked for the entire meal about the clinic, about the coaches, about her own team, and a girl named Priya, who was the best defender she'd ever seen, and how she intended to study Priya's footwork for the rest of the season. Vanessa listened to all of it. Not politely, genuinely. She asked follow-up questions, real ones. Marcus watched her listen. He thought about what his mother had said, about being whole instead of surviving. He thought about Vanessa in the ditch gripping his wrist with the strength of someone who had decided in the moment that she wasn't ready to let go. He thought maybe that's the thing about her. She decides, she commits. She's not careful about it the way I've been careful about everything for 4 years. She just goes. He thought about whether that was something he could learn. He thought maybe it wasn't learning. Maybe it was remembering. Maya finished her second slice and looked between them both with the evaluating expression that meant she'd been forming a conclusion for some time and had arrived. "I like her," she announced, pointing at Vanessa with the crust. "You can't point," Marcus said. "Sorry." She lowered the crust. I like her, though. Thank you, Vanessa said. She said it simply without performing gratitude, which Maya clocked immediately and approved of. You should come to my game, Maya said. It's in 2 weeks. Dad never brings anyone. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Maya, I'm just saying. He never brings anyone. It's always just him and Grandma when Grandma can come, and Coach Derek's wife, who brings the orange slices. She looked at Vanessa. Do you like soccer? I'm learning, Vanessa said. I can teach you. The rules aren't that complicated. Mostly you just don't use your hands. She paused. Except the goalie. The goalie can use hands. That seems like an important exception. It's the most important exception. Marcus looked across the booth at Vanessa. She was looking at Maya, but she felt him looking, and she glanced over, and there was something in her expression, something underneath the competence and the control and the edge that he recognized, because he'd felt it himself in the last few weeks. The feeling of being somewhere you hadn't expected to be, in circumstances you hadn't planned for, and finding to your own surprise that you didn't want to leave. I'd like to come, Vanessa said, if that's okay with your dad. They both looked at Marcus. He looked at his daughter, at her mother's eyes in her face, at the way she was watching him with something beyond hope, with certainty actually, with the unshakable faith of a child who had decided her father was going to get this one right. He looked at Vanessa. It's okay, he said. Mame. And in the booth, in the neighborhood pizza place with the duct tape on the corners, something settled, not dramatically, not with music or weather or any of the signifiers that stories use to mark their important moments. Just quietly, the way decisions settle when they're the right ones. Like a bone that's been set correctly, finally accepting its place. They stayed for another hour. The pizza got cold. Nobody mentioned it. End of part 2. Maya's soccer game was on a Saturday morning in early November, the kind of cold that made the grass stiff and turned every breath visible, and Vanessa arrived 7 minutes early with a thermos of actual coffee and no idea where to stand. Marcus found her at the edge of the field, looking at the bleachers with the expression of someone who had navigated Senate hearings and hostile boardrooms, and was now genuinely uncertain about the protocol for a recreational under-9 soccer game. You brought coffee? He said. I brought 2 cups. She handed him one. I didn't know if you'd have time to. I didn't. He took it. Thank you. They stood together on the sideline. Vanessa watched Maya's team warm up with the focused attention she brought to everything, and Marcus watched Vanessa watch Maya, and the morning had the quality of something ordinary that was also quietly not ordinary at all. Which one is Priya? Vanessa asked. Number 14, the one already arguing with the referee. She's 8. She's got opinions. Maya's going to love her forever. She already does. May. The game started. Maya played midfield, which suited her. She had the instinct for being where the ball was going rather than where it was, which Marcus had always thought was a metaphor for something, but had never articulated. Vanessa gripped her coffee cup and tracked the ball with the intensity of someone learning a language in real time, and twice she started to say something and stopped herself. And the third time Marcus said, "Just ask," and she said, "Why did the ref blow the whistle just then?" And he explained the out-of-bounds call, and she nodded, and didn't ask again for 10 minutes, and then asked 4 questions in a row. He answered all of them. At halftime, Maya ran over and grabbed the water bottle Marcus held out without breaking stride. She looked at Vanessa. "You're watching," Maya said, as if this required acknowledgement. "I'm trying to understand the offside rule," Vanessa said. "I don't think I'm there yet." "Nobody understands offside," Maya said with great authority. "Even the refs don't understand offside. Dad says it's just a rule that exists, so everyone has something to argue about." "I didn't say it quite like that," Marcus said. "You said it exactly like that." Maya took a long pull from the water bottle, shook her hair out of her face, and looked between them both in the assessing way she had that always made Marcus feel slightly evaluated. Then she said to Vanessa, "Do you have kids?" "Maya." Marcus started. "It's okay," Vanessa said. To Maya, "No, I don't." "Did you want them?" Maya, "It's a real question, Dad. It's not rude." She looked at Vanessa with the earnestness of someone who meant exactly what she said. "I just want to know." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said honestly, "I think I told myself for a long time that I didn't. Because the things I was building felt more urgent. And then at some point I looked up and..." She paused. "You make different choices when you're not paying attention." Maya considered this with the gravity it apparently deserved. Then she said, "My mom wanted lots of kids. Dad says she would have been really good at it." The air changed. Not drastically, just a degree the way it does when something true is said out loud, in a space where truth is welcome. Marcus looked at the middle distance. Vanessa looked at Maya. "She sounds like she was wonderful," Vanessa said. "Sounds like..." She was. Maya capped her water bottle. "Okay, second half." She ran back onto the field. Marcus breathed out slowly. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said, quietly beside him. "Don't be. She talks about her mom. I want her to. Diane would have hated it if Maya stopped." He watched his daughter take her position. She would have also had a lot of opinions about this situation. "What situation?" He glanced at her. Vanessa looked back. And in the cold morning light on the sideline of a recreational soccer field, both of them did the thing they'd been carefully not doing for weeks, acknowledged, without saying it, that there was a situation. "Was she right about things?" Vanessa asked. "Your wife?" "Almost always. It was exhausting." "You miss it?" "Every day." He looked at the field. "She would have liked you, I think. You're both direct. You don't perform." "I perform constantly. Not around Maya." He said it simply. "Not around me." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was different, quieter, carrying something she didn't usually let out in the open. "I don't know how to be small, Marcus. I've spent 20 years making myself as large as possible in every room I enter, because that was the only way to get taken seriously. And now I'm..." She stopped. "I'm standing on a soccer field, and I don't know the offside rule, and your 8-year-old just asked me something nobody has asked me in 15 years, and I answered it honestly, and I don't..." She stopped again, looked at the field. "I don't know what to do with that." "You're doing it," he said. She turned to look at him. "You're already doing it," he said. "Showing up, not knowing, answering the question honestly." He met her eyes. "That's it. That's the whole thing." The second half started. Maya's team scored twice. Maya assisting both goals, and Vanessa made a sound that was unmistakably a cheer, and then looked briefly mortified, and then made it again when Maya looked over from the field and threw both arms up in triumph. They won 3-1. Maya ran off the field to her father first because she always did, because that was their ritual, and he caught her mid-run, and she said, "Did you see? Did you see the second one?" And he said, "I saw both of them." And she said, "Vanessa cheered," in a tone that made it sound like a significant endorsement. And Marcus said, "I know." And Maya pulled back and looked at him with Diane's eyes and said simply, "Good." Then she ran to get orange slices. It was 3 weeks after the soccer game when everything changed. The call came at 11:40 on a Tuesday night. Marcus was on shift doing rounds on the 3rd floor when his phone buzzed. Vanessa. He stepped into an alcove. "Hey." He could hear something immediately, not panic, but the particular tightness of someone holding panic at a controlled distance. "What's wrong?" "I need to talk to someone." A pause. "I need to talk to you." "I'm on shift until..." "I know, I'm sorry, I shouldn't..." She stopped. He could hear her breathing. "Forget it. Vanessa." His voice had the quality it had in the ditch, the one that was a tool. "What happened?" A long silence. Then, "I got a report today. An internal audit. I've been seeing fragments of it for weeks, but they kept telling me it was incomplete. They needed more time. The numbers weren't—" She stopped. He heard her exhale. "It's worse than I thought. Much worse." "What kind of worse?" "Harassment. Systematic. Multiple departments. HR complaints that were buried. Discrimination cases that were settled with NDAs. Executives who knew who had to have known and chose the revenue over the people." Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of someone holding a very heavy thing with both hands. "And the board knows. They've seen a version of this. They've been sitting on it for 8 months. Marcus said nothing. He let her have the silence. "They called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," Vanessa continued. "The recommendation from legal, from my board chairman, from 3 independent advisors, the recommendation is to manage the disclosure, control the narrative, settle with the remaining complainants under NDA, make it go away." She paused. "They're asking me to bury it, Marcus." Dear, he heard it in the word, asking the thing under it, the recognition that she was calling him, not because she didn't know what was right, but because she was standing at the edge of what doing right would cost her and needed to hear it from someone who wasn't on her payroll. "How bad is the exposure if it comes out?" he asked. "I lose board members, probably several major institutional investors. The stock takes a significant hit. Possibly my position if the board decides someone needs to absorb the narrative." She said it cleanly, the way she talked about everything facts assembled and presented. But facts could be armor, and he was starting to recognize when she was wearing hers. "My lawyers think we can contain it for another year, maybe 2. Get ahead of it privately, restructure the HR leadership, make the systemic changes quietly." "Always have been my way." "And the people who reported it." Silence. "They go away too?" he asked. Not aggressively, just asking. "They'd be compensated, significantly." For their silence. Another silence. Longer. "Yes," she said. He thought about what to say. He thought about Maya at home with his mother covering the shift. He thought about the hospital hallway and the bad hot chocolate machine and 3 weeks of soccer games and pizza. He thought about the woman who had gripped his wrist in a wrecked car and asked him to make it fast. He thought about what he'd said to her that night. "If I had told you to let go," he said quietly, that night on Route 9, "if I had decided the math didn't work out in your favor, would you have wanted me to—" "That's not the—" "Vanessa." A pause. "No," she said. "No, I wouldn't have." Those people reported what happened to them because they believed someone in your building would do something about it. They took that risk. They absorbed that cost. He let that sit. "What you're describing is finding out they were wrong. I know." Her voice cracked just slightly, just once, but he heard it. "I know what it is." "Then why are you calling me?" "Because I'm scared." She said it like a confession. Like something being extracted, not offered. "I am genuinely, completely terrified. I have worked for 20 years to build something that means something to me. And if I release this tomorrow, all of that is in danger. My board, my investors, my everything I've built could come apart, and I don't—" She stopped. "I don't know how to want the right thing more than I want to protect what I've built." Marcus leaned against the alcove wall. Down the hall, a nurse pushed a cart. The hospital continued its quiet nighttime work around him. "You already want the right thing more," he said. "You're calling me at midnight because you already know what you're going to do. You're not asking me what to do. You're asking me to stay on the phone while you get ready to do it." The silence that followed was the longest yet. "That's terrifying," she said. "I know. You're very calm about this. You're calm enough for decisions. What you need right now isn't calm. You need someone to stay on the line." He heard her exhale. Once. Twice. "Okay," she said. Okay, he said. If I release this tomorrow, when the board pushes back, and they will push back hard, I'm going to need the decision to have already been made. I'm going to need to walk in there already certain. Then be certain now. Make the decision right now before the morning, before the room full of lawyers. Make it on the phone with me. That's not how. Vanessa, do you know what the right thing is? A pause. Yes. Do you have the information you need to act on it? Yes. Is there anything that happens tomorrow that changes what happened to those people? No. Then you've already decided. The meeting tomorrow is just the telling. He heard something shift in her breathing, a release of something held for too long. You were a security guard when I met you, she said. I still am. You're not, though. You know that. I'm a security guard who used to be a medic who is standing in a hospital hallway helping a CEO decide to do the right thing. That's what I am tonight. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. I'm going to do it, she said. I'm releasing the report tomorrow. I know. It's going to be very bad for a while. Probably. You're not going to tell me it'll be okay. I think you know it'll be okay. I think you also know that okay and easy aren't the same thing, and you don't actually want me to pretend they are. No, she said. I don't. A pause. Thank you. Get some sleep. You're going to need your head clear. Marcus. Yeah. I'm glad you didn't let go in that ditch. He closed his eyes for a second. Just one. Me too, he said. He finished his shift. He drove home. He sat in the kitchen in the quiet and did not make scrambled eggs and did not call anyone. He sat with the particular feeling of having been present for something that mattered, of having been in the right place for reasons that had nothing to do with planning. At 6:42 the next morning, Vanessa walked into the emergency board meeting in the 32nd floor conference room of her company's Boston headquarters, with a printed copy of the full audit report in her hand and her general counsel 3 steps behind her, and a board chairman who stood up the moment she came through the door because he'd been briefed on what she intended and had spent the previous evening assembling arguments against it. His name was Richard Holt, 61 years old, 22 years on the board, the kind of man who had navigated every corporate crisis of the last 2 decades through the application of controlled language and strategic patience, and the institutional knowledge of where all the bodies were buried. He started before she sat down. Vanessa, I understand you want to move forward with full disclosure. I want to make sure you have the complete picture before I have the complete picture, Richard. She set the report on the table. I've had it since yesterday. What I had yesterday that I didn't have this morning was uncertainty about what to do with it. She sat. She looked at him directly. I don't have that anymore. The legal exposure alone. I'm aware of the legal exposure. The market response could be, Richard. She said it with a patience that was not soft, the kind of patience that is itself a form of force. I know what you're going to say. I know every argument. I've been running them myself for the last 12 hours. She looked around the table. 7 faces. Some of them she'd known for years. Some of them she now understood had known about this report for 8 months. I want to ask everyone in this room one question, and I want an honest answer. Silence. If this had happened to your daughter, she said, and she had reported it and the company had buried it, would you be advising the same strategy right now? The silence was different after that question. Heavier. The kind that acknowledges an argument that can't be answered. Richard opened his mouth. Don't, she said quietly. Just think about it. She opened the report. We're releasing the full findings today, she said. We're naming the executives involved, and those named are terminated effective immediately. We're opening an independent investigation with an external firm, the choice of which will not involve anyone currently on this board. We're reaching back out to every individual who settled under NDA, and offering them the option to have those agreements voided with no financial penalty and full reinstatement of their legal options. She looked up. And we're doing all of this transparently publicly, and without a communications strategy designed to minimize the story. Because minimizing this story is exactly what got us here. Richard stared at her. Around the table, some faces were pale. Just two, were nodding almost imperceptibly. "You're going to lose board members over this," Richard said, not threatening, just stating. "The last argument in the arsenal when the others have failed." "Possibly," she said. "But I'm going to be able to look at the people who work for me. And right now that matters more." She closed the report. "I'm going to need everyone's full cooperation with the investigation. Anyone who can't commit to that should resign today. It will be cleaner for everyone." She stood. "I'm going to speak to staff in an hour," she said. "You're all welcome to attend. Meeting's over." She walked out. In the elevator going down, her hand was shaking. She looked at it, just observed it clinically, the way she'd observed her own injuries in the ditch. Her body registering what her voice had refused to. She pressed her palm flat against her thigh and held it there. The elevator opened. She walked out into the lobby. She pulled out her phone and typed one sentence to Marcus. "It's done." His reply came in 40 seconds. "How do you feel?" She thought about it. About Richard's face. About the two board members who had nodded. About the weight of the report she'd put on that table. She typed back, like something stopped. His response. "Yeah, that's what it feels like when something stops that should have stopped a long time ago." She stood in the lobby of her own building and read that text twice. Then she put her phone away and went to talk to her employees. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary morning. Coffee cups, commuters, a November wind that meant business. None of it knew what had just happened on the 32nd floor, or that a woman was standing in a lobby with shaking hands and certain eyes, or that the decision she'd made had roots in a rainy ditch on Route 9 and a man who had refused to let go. But the people in the conference room above knew. And the ones who had filed reports years ago and been told to be quiet would know soon. And the two board members who had nodded, they would remember which side of the table they'd been on when it mattered. Some things start with a crash. Some things start with a choice. This one had started with both. The story that broke wasn't the one Vanessa's communications team had prepared for. Yeah, they had drafted a careful, measured statement, the kind that acknowledges wrongdoing in language, calibrated to acknowledge as little as possible, while appearing to acknowledge everything. Corporate contrition professionally packaged. 3 lawyers had reviewed it. A crisis PR firm had been on standby for 2 days, waiting for the version of this that they could manage. Vanessa scrapped all of it. Then what she sent to the press was the report itself. The full document, 114 pages. No executive summary softening the findings. No strategic framing. Just the names, the dates, the complaints, the buried responses. The chain of decisions that had protected the wrong people, for the wrong reasons, for 8 months longer than any of it should have been permitted to survive. The story that broke was the unmediated truth. And the unmediated truth, it turned out, was a very different animal from the managed version. By noon, her company's name was trending in every major news feed in the country. By 2 o'clock, 3 of the terminated executives had issued their own statements through their personal attorney's statements that were, in the considered opinion of most who read them, the wrong move. By 4 o'clock, the first of the employees who had originally filed complaints was speaking publicly on record voluntarily, because the NDA she'd signed was no longer in force, and she'd been waiting for exactly this moment for 14 months. Her name was Angela Torres. She'd been a senior project manager. She spoke calmly, precisely, and with the particular authority of someone who had rehearsed this in her own head so many times that the performance of it felt like relief. She said 3 sentences that every major outlet picked up and ran verbatim. Dad. She said I reported what happened to me because I believed it was wrong. I was told to be quiet and compensated for my silence. Today, for the first time, someone in that building agreed with me that it was wrong. And Richard Holt resigned by 5 o'clock. 2 other board members followed by end of day. A fourth sent Vanessa a private message that said simply, "I should have pushed harder 8 months ago. I'm sorry." She read it twice and didn't respond because she didn't know yet what the right response was, and she'd rather say nothing than say something she didn't mean. Marcus watched all of it from a distance. Marcus. Why? He was on day shift when the story broke and the hospital had televisions, and twice he walked past a waiting room where the news was running and caught fragments of it. Vanessa's name, her company's name, the kind of coverage that meant the story had escaped the business pages and become something the general public was tracking. A colleague asked him if he'd heard about it. He said he had. The colleague said it was either brave or stupid, and he wasn't sure which. Marcus said sometimes those were the same thing and kept walking. He texted her at 6 that evening. "You doing okay?" She replied an hour later. Defining okay. Fair. Are you safe? Physically, yes. Professionally, ask me in 6 months. I'm asking now. A pause. Then I'm standing. That's what I've got tonight. He thought about that. Then he typed, "Standing is enough. How's Daniel holding up?" He cried in the hallway for 11 minutes and then came back in and was completely professional about it. "He's remarkable. Sounds like someone else I know." Her response took a minute. "I don't cry in hallways." "No, you just make decisions that require other people to." Another pause. Longer. Then, is that a criticism? No, it's an observation. You made the right call, Vanessa. The fallout is real, but the alternative was worse. Tell me it. The board is going to push for my removal. Holt was the most organized opposition, but he's not the only one. There are 3 institutional investors who haven't called me back today. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. Aren't you supposed to tell me it'll be fine? I told you before, I don't do that. Right. A pause. I know it'll be fine. I think I just need to hear it. It'll be fine. You don't know that. No. But you're still standing. And the people who needed someone to act finally have that. Whatever comes next, that part is done and it's right. The rest is just weather. She didn't respond for several minutes. Then, weather. Storm comes, storm passes. You built something real. Real things survive weather. That's either very wise or a complete oversimplification. Maybe both. He could almost hear the exhale through the phone. Then Maya has a game Thursday. She does. I'll be there. If that's still... It's still. Okay. Good. A pause. Thank you, Marcus. Get some sleep. He put his phone in his pocket and finished his shift. The next 6 weeks were by any reasonable measure brutal. 3 major institutional investors reduced their holdings significantly. The stock dropped 14% in the first week, stabilized. Dropped another 4%. Then began the slow climb that analysts described as cautious, and which Vanessa described to Marcus over the phone as agonizing. 2 class action inquiries were opened by plaintiffs' attorneys who had been watching the situation, which her legal team managed with the competence of people who had been given clear instructions and followed them without the burden of competing agendas. She gave 12 interviews. Not the controlled kind, real ones with journalists who were not friendly, asking questions that were not comfortable, and she answered them with the directness that had always been her natural mode, and that for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to calibrate. She said things that her PR team flinched at, and that her remaining board members flagged as unpredictable, and that ordinary people watching and reading found remarkable for their plainness. In one interview that was shared more than any other, the journalist asked her what had changed. What had shifted in her thinking that led to a decision her entire board had advised against? She said, "Someone reminded me that the people who filed those reports were trusting the building, trusting that someone inside it would do something. And I had a choice about whether to be the kind of person that trust was warranted in." She paused. "I didn't want to be the other kind." The journalist asked if someone in her organization had encouraged her. "Not in my organization," she said, and didn't elaborate. Marcus watched that clip twice on his phone in the hospital parking lot between shifts. Then he put his phone away and went to work. It was during this period, the 6 weeks of fallout of legal noise and board tensions and market volatility, that something happened that Marcus had not anticipated, because he'd been so focused on Vanessa's storm that he hadn't noticed the quieter one building in his own direction. Dr. Sarah Mitchell called him on a Wednesday afternoon in December. He'd known Sarah Mitchell for 3 years. She was the head of emergency trauma research at Boston Medical, a woman of 52 with the organized intensity of someone who had spent 30 years in situations where precision was survival. She and Marcus had crossed paths when she'd consulted on a case at Mercy General, and she'd tracked him down afterward because she'd seen his assessment, and it was, in her words, the kind of thinking that shouldn't be wasted on incident reports. Joe. He'd deflected. She'd persisted the way driven people persist, not aggressively, but with the patient frequency of someone who has decided and is waiting for the other party to catch up. This time the call was different. "I have something specific," she said, skipping the preliminary pleasantries because Sarah Mitchell regarded them as inefficient. "I'm building a national consulting network for pre-hospital trauma response, basically bringing combat medicine methodology into civilian emergency systems, which are 30 years behind in several critical areas. I want you as a senior consultant. It's part-time to start. You keep whatever you're doing. You work with my team twice a week. Advise on protocol development, review case studies." A pause. "Marcus, I've been watching you waste yourself for 3 years. I'm not calling you again after this. Either you're in, or I find someone less qualified." He sat with the phone against his ear in the hospital parking lot for a long moment. His instinct, the one that had been running the show since Diane died, the one that said, "Stay small, stay safe. Don't become someone Maya might lose again," rose up immediately with its familiar arguments. Too much, too disruptive. What if the time commitment grows? What if it changes the stability he'd built? What if he was wrong about what he still had to offer? He listened to all of it. Then he heard his own voice from 3 months ago in a ditch. "I've seen worse outcomes from injuries that looked less survivable." Then he heard Vanessa from a pizza booth. "You make different choices when you're not paying attention." Then he heard his mother, "Maya needs to see her father whole. Not surviving. Whole." "When do you need an answer?" he asked. "Yesterday," Sarah said. "But I'll take today." He breathed in, out. "Send me the paperwork." Sarah Mitchell did not make a production of this. She said, "Good," with the brevity of someone crossing an item off a list that had been open for too long, and told him to expect the documents by end of day, and ended the call. Marcus sat in the parking lot. He thought about the version of himself that had existed 4 years ago before Diane's diagnosis, before the long, terrible year of treatment and hope, and the particular cruelty of hope not being enough. The version that had run toward things instead of maintaining a careful, managed distance from them. The version that had believed his own capacity was something to be used rather than protected. He missed that version. He thought maybe it wasn't gone. Maybe it had been sitting in a parking lot waiting for him to come back for it. He called Vanessa. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, everything okay?" "I took a job," he said. "Consulting, trauma research. It's part-time, but it's going back to medicine." A pause, not long. Then, "Marcus." "I know." "That's..." She stopped. He could hear her processing. "How do you feel?" He thought about the question. He thought about how she'd answered that same question when he'd asked it after her board meeting. Like something stopped. He understood that differently now because what he felt wasn't something stopping. It was the opposite. Like something started, he said. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had something in it that wasn't the CEO, wasn't the controlled professional. Was something underneath that? Something that had been making more frequent appearances since a rainy night on Route 9. "I'm proud of you," she said. He wasn't sure what to do with that. It landed in a place that didn't get used much. He said, "Don't make it weird." She laughed, the real one, the one that got out. "I'm going to make it extremely weird. You've been standing in that parking lot, haven't you?" "How did you?" "Because that's where you go when things matter. You called me from that parking lot 3 times. He looked around at the parking lot, considered whether this was something to dispute. "Yeah," he said. "Go back inside," she said. "And Marcus, tell Maya." "I will. Tell her tonight. She should hear it from you before she figures it out on her own. She will figure it out on her own. She figures everything out. I know she does. It's remarkable and slightly unnerving." "Welcome to my life," he said. He told Maya that evening over dinner. He explained the consulting role in terms that were honest, that he'd been asked to use his training to help improve how hospitals respond to emergencies, that it meant some extra hours, some weeks, that it was something he'd been moving towards slowly, without quite realizing it. Maya listened the way she always listened, with the full frontal intensity of someone who had decided this conversation was worth her complete attention. When he finished, she said, "Is it what you want to do?" "Yeah, I think it is." "Then why did you wait so long?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "Dad," she said with the particular patience of an 8-year-old who has decided to handle her parent gently. "I know you stayed small because of me, because you didn't want to be someone I could lose again. But I'm not going to lose you." She picked up her fork. "And even if something happened, I would rather have had you living than have had you hiding. Mom would say the same thing." He stared at his daughter. She ate a bite of her dinner. "Also," she said, "Vanessa told me you were thinking about it." "Vanessa, when did you?" "She came to my practice last week. You were on shift. We had hot chocolate from the machine on the 2nd floor." Maya looked up with absolute innocence. "The one on the 2nd floor is bad, by the way. I don't know why you two keep going there." "You and Vanessa had hot chocolate. And she told me about the consulting thing. She said you were scared, and that sometimes people who are very brave about other people's lives have trouble being brave about their own." Maya considered. "I think she was talking about herself, too." Marcus sat back in his chair. He looked at his daughter. He thought about Vanessa in the hospital hallway, dragging an IV pole and asking about coffee. He thought about the soccer game and the pizza booth and 12 midnight phone calls and a boardroom and a parking lot. He thought about how a story could start in a ditch and end up somewhere so completely unlike a ditch that you had to trace it backwards to understand how you'd gotten here. "You like her," he said. "I already told you that." "I know, He stopped. "I want to make sure that you're okay with whatever this is." Maya put her fork down. She looked at him with Diane's eyes carrying whatever it was that Diane had passed to her, that quality of seeing clearly without flinching. "Dad," she said, "I've been waiting for you to be happy again for 4 years. I'm 8. That's half my life." She picked up her fork again. "So yes, I'm okay with whatever this is. Can we please be done being careful about it?" He laughed. He didn't mean to. It just came out full and genuine from somewhere that had been closed for a long time. "Yeah," he said. "We can be done being careful." "Good." She pointed at his plate. "Eat. You always tell me to eat." He ate. After dinner, while Amaya was doing homework, he texted Vanessa. "You went to her practice." "She invited me. I didn't show up uninvited. I want that on the record." "She invited you." "Last Tuesday. She sent me a text from your phone, by the way, which I think you should know." He looked up at the ceiling. "What did she say?" She said, "This is Maya. Come to my practice Thursday. My dad won't ask you. He's being careful. He needs to stop." Direct quote. He stared at the phone. "She's 8 years old. She's remarkable. You know that. She told me you said you were talking about yourself too. When you told her I was scared about the consulting." A longer pause this time. "Maybe I was." "Then I have a board meeting next Tuesday that I've been dreading for 3 weeks. Two of the shareholders who reduced their holdings are sending proxies, and the agenda is essentially discuss leadership stability, which means discuss whether I should still be running my own company." "Are you scared?" "Yes." "Good. Explain how that's good." "Because you're not pretending you're not. That's different than it would have been 3 months ago." She didn't respond for a while. Then, "You know what's strange? I've been in tougher rooms than that board meeting. Actual Senate hearings. Hostile acquisition negotiations. I've sat across from people who wanted to take things from me, and I've won almost every time. But those times I didn't care what they thought of me. I cared about winning." A pause. "Now I care what I think of myself afterward. That's new? It's very inconvenient." "Yeah." "Is it always going to feel like this? Caring about yourself honestly?" "Yes." He thought about it. About 4 years of making himself small. About the parking lot. About Maya saying, "I would rather have had you living." "Gets easier," he typed. "Doesn't get smaller. Just easier to carry." That's not comforting. Wasn't trying to comfort you. You don't need comforting. You need to know it's real. And it's real. It's real. Another pause. Then Marcus. "Yeah. Thank you for not letting go in that ditch." He'd heard her say that before on the phone after the board meeting, the first version of it. But it felt different now, larger, like it had accumulated meaning in the months since. "Thank you for not asking me to." He put his phone down on the kitchen table. He listened to the sound of Maya in the next room, pencil on paper, the particular rhythm of a child working through a problem. Ordinary and irreplaceable. Damn. He thought about the consulting role, about Dr. Mitchell's unimpressed efficiency, about walking back into the part of himself he'd boxed up and called sacrifice. He thought about the board meeting Vanessa was dreading, about two shareholders who were going to send proxies to ask if she was still the right person to lead her own company, about the look she'd have on her face walking into that room and the look she'd have walking out of it, and how certain he was, not from optimism, but from 4 months of watching her, that those two expressions would be identical, that she'd bring the same face to both sides of the hardest thing. He thought that was a remarkable quality in a person. He thought he'd like to be there when she came out. He picked up the phone again. "The board meeting. Tuesday." "Yes. I'm off shift Monday night. I'll be up." "You don't have to." "I'll be up," he said again. "Text me when it's done." A long pause. The longest she'd left in a while. Then, "Okay." Then, "Good night, Marcus." "Good night." He closed the phone. He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet apartment, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel like something missing. It felt like space, room for something that was still becoming what it was going to be. He got up. He washed the dishes. He checked on Maya. He went to bed. He slept clean and full the way he had that afternoon months ago, after the restaurant, after the first real conversation, after the beginning of whatever this was. And in the morning, when Maya came into the kitchen with her backpack incorrectly fastened and her hair not entirely finished, and the specific energy of a child who had decided the day was already interesting, she looked at her father standing at the stove and said, "You look different again." "Do I?" "Yeah." She climbed onto the stool. "You look like you did before, when I was little." She accepted the plate he slid toward her. "I like it." He looked at his daughter. "Me too," he said. The board meeting on Tuesday lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Vanessa knew the exact duration because she'd glanced at her watch when she walked in, and again when she walked out, not from impatience, but from the habit of someone who had spent decades measuring the cost of time. 4 hours and 11 minutes to determine whether she still had the right to run the company she had built from 11 employees and a rented office in Cambridge to 4,000 people across 9 states. She'd walked in with the same face she always walked in with. That part Marcus had been right about. The 2 proxy shareholders representatives of institutional funds that had reduced their positions after the disclosure came in with prepared statements, and a consultant they'd hired specifically for this meeting, a man named Gerald Forsyth, who had the polished delivery of someone paid to deliver bad news in language that sounded reasonable. He cited market response leadership uncertainty and what he called the optics of unilateral decision-making without adequate board consultation. Vanessa let him finish. Then she said, "Are we done with the prepared material?" Gerald Forsyth blinked. "I have a few additional." "Take your time," she said. With patience that was its own form of force. He had 3 additional points. She let him make all of them. Then she opened the folder she'd brought and slid copies around the table. "This is a summary of employee retention data from the past 60 days, she said. Turnover is down 31% compared to the same period last year. Job applications are up 214%, the most we've seen since our founding year. I've received direct communication from 7 companies in our sector asking how we've structured our new compliance framework because they want to implement something similar." She closed her own copy. The story the market told in the first 2 weeks of the disclosure is not the full story. The story told by the people who actually work here and the people who want to work here is different. Stock price, one of the proxies started, recovered 60% of the initial drop in 30 days, she said. We're projecting full recovery within the quarter based on current trajectory. Our legal team has settled 3 of the complaint cases without litigation. The remaining 2 are proceeding transparently. There are no surprises left in this company. For the first time in 8 months, there are no surprises. She looked around the table. I'll take questions. So, there were many questions. She answered every one of them. Not defensively directly with the specific information they required, and without the cushioning language that was the corporate equivalent of hoping no one looked too closely. At the end of it, Gerald Forsyth gathered his materials and said in the tone of a man recalibrating that his clients would want to review the retention data independently. Of course, Vanessa said. Daniel will send you everything this afternoon. He left. The remaining board members stayed. One of them, Patricia Okafor, who had been on the board 11 years, and had sent Vanessa the private apology. The night of the disclosure said, "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. I also think we owe you an apology for how long some of us sat on the information." "You do," Vanessa said, not unkindly, just factually. "And I accept it. Let's build something that doesn't need apologizing for going forward." She walked out at 2:17 in the afternoon. She texted Marcus one word. "Done." He replied in under a minute, and she stood on the sidewalk outside her building with November cold pressing against her face and typed, "I'm still here." His response, "Yeah, you are." She smiled. Actually smiled standing alone on a Boston sidewalk with the wind doing what Boston wind does in November, which is remind you that it was here long before you and will be here considerably after. She smiled at her phone, like someone who had forgotten for a while that this was a thing she did, and was remembering it now. She walked to the parking garage. She drove home, and for the first time in 6 weeks, she did not open her laptop when she got there. Christmas came to the Johnson apartment with the organizational intensity of an 8-year-old who had opinions about tree placement ornament distribution and the precise ratio of colored lights to white lights, which she'd determined through research was a matter of personal philosophy and not aesthetics, and whose philosophy was colored, and that was final. Vanessa came for Christmas Eve. It was Marcus who'd asked her which had required more internal negotiation than the board meeting, and less than the consulting decision landing somewhere in the range of things that feel large in the anticipation and then simply right in the arrival. He'd asked her 2 weeks before casually over the phone in the middle of a conversation about something else, the way people ask things that matter when they're trying not to make them too heavy. "Maya wants to know if you have plans for Christmas Eve," he said. "Does Maya want to know, or do you?" A pause. "Both." "Then yes, I'll come. Ciao." She brought cornbread because Marcus had mentioned his mother's cornbread once in passing, and Vanessa Cole did not let information go to waste. She'd found a recipe she liked and made it herself in the kitchen of her penthouse apartment, which had a professional-grade stove she had used approximately 4 times in 3 years, and the result was not perfect, but it was genuine, and she arrived at his door holding it with both hands, and the expression of someone who has done something slightly outside their known capabilities and is waiting for the verdict. His mother, Gloria, answered the door. The two women looked at each other. Gloria's eyes went to the cornbread, then to Vanessa. Then she stepped back and said, "Come on in, baby. Let me see what you brought." It was a more thorough evaluation than anything the board had put her through. Gloria tasted the cornbread in the kitchen with the judicial seriousness of a woman whose recipes were institutional knowledge, and then she said, which conveyed neither approval nor disapproval, and was clearly designed to keep Vanessa uncertain, and then she said, "The ratio is right. Could use 5 more minutes on the bottom." And then she handed it back and said, "Put it on the counter. We'll serve it with dinner." Vanessa met Marcus's eyes across the kitchen. He mouthed, "She likes you." She mouthed back, "How can you tell?" He mouthed, "She told you what was wrong with it." Maya appeared at that moment from the hallway at full velocity, Christmas Eve energy radiating from her like a signal, and she grabbed Vanessa's hand and pulled her toward the living room to assess the ornament situation, which apparently still required a second opinion. Marcus stood in the kitchen with his mother. Gloria was stirring something on the stove. She did not look at him when she said, "She's good." "I know. Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Gloria considered. "Someone softer. Someone who'd need more handling." She tasted what she was stirring. "She's not soft, but she's real. That's better than soft." "Yeah," he said. "It is." "You scared?" "Yes." "Good. Means it matters." She handed him a spoon. "Taste this and tell me if it needs anything." He tasted it. It needed nothing, and he said so, and she looked pleased in the way she looked pleased, which was without excessive demonstration. From the living room came the sound of Maya explaining at length and with authority why the gold star went on top instead of the silver one, and Vanessa's voice asking follow-up questions in a tone that was paying genuine attention, and Maya's voice becoming more animated because she had found in Vanessa the particular gift of someone who listened to her the way adults rarely did, not waiting for her to finish, but actually tracking. Marcus listened to that sound from the kitchen and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, something that required a more specific word than happiness, something in the register of rightness. The sense that the pieces of a thing had found their correct positions, not through planning, but through the patient work of showing up again and again until the shape of it became clear. Dinner was loud and specific in the way of families that have developed their rituals. Gloria's preferences about which dishes went, where Maya's position on the seating arrangement, the particular conversational energy of 3 generations in one room with one more person added, who was by any observable measure figuring out that she belonged there. At one point, Gloria looked across the table at Vanessa and said, "Marcus tells me you run a big company." "I do," Vanessa said, "and you made the decision to be honest about what was happening inside it, even when it cost you." "Yes." Gloria nodded slowly. "My son's father did the same thing once, at work, cost him his position, took him 2 years to find something better." She picked up her fork. "The 2 years were hard. What came after wasn't." She looked at Vanessa levelly. "Just thought you should know that." Vanessa held her gaze. "Thank you, Gloria." "Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing." She resumed eating. And bring better cornbread next time. The ratio is right, but the bottom needs 5 minutes. You already told her that, Mom, Marcus said. Repetition is how we learn, Gloria said serenely. Maya laughed so hard she nearly fell off her chair. 6 months after the board meeting, the company's culture index, an internal measure that Vanessa had always considered a soft metric and now understood to be one of the most important ones, reached the highest score in the company's history. The independent investigation had completed and published its findings. 3 executives faced legal consequences. 2 had settled. The HR department had been rebuilt from the department head down, with the specific mandate that it existed to protect employees, not manage narratives on their behalf. Angela Torres had returned to the company. She'd accepted a senior position, not the same one she'd had before, but a better one, with the understanding that she was owed not just reinstatement, but advancement. She met with Vanessa twice in the first month. The first meeting was professional. The second was more complicated, a long conversation about the years in between, about what silence costs, about what it means to have an apology accepted by someone who earned the right to withhold it. Angela had said at the end of the second meeting, "I don't know if I can fully trust the institution again. I'm not sure I'm supposed to right away." "You're not supposed to," Vanessa had said. "Trust this, that every decision I make going forward has you in the room. Even when you're not there, you're in the room." Angela had looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Okay, that I can work with." Vanessa told Marcus about that conversation that evening on the phone. She told it straight through without summarizing, which meant it mattered to her in a way that she was still processing. When she finished, Marcus said, "That's the whole point of it, you know, what you did. Making it right with Angela. Making it so she's in the room, even when she's not there." He paused. "That's what accountability actually looks like, not the press release, not the policy change. That." She was quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn to think like that?" "Medicine," he said. "When someone's life is in your hands, you can't perform care. You either care or you don't. Performing it gets people killed." A pause. "I think it works the same in a company." "You should have been a doctor," she said. "I am now. Technically." "You know what I mean." "You know what I know what you mean." He let the silence sit for a moment. "I'm figuring out that I get to be more than one thing. It took a while." "Join the club," she said. Marcus's consulting work with Dr. Mitchell had evolved by spring into something neither of them had initially mapped out. What had begun as twice-weekly protocol reviews had expanded to include a pilot program in 4 cities, testing the integration of combat medicine methodologies into civilian trauma response. The early data was the kind that made funding conversations easier, measurable, specific, significant. Response times improved. Outcomes improved. The particular gap between what pre-hospital medicine knew how to do and what it was actually doing in the field began incrementally to close. Sarah Mitchell presented the preliminary findings at a National Emergency Medicine Conference in March. She named Marcus in the acknowledgments with the efficiency of someone who doesn't overdo it and the specificity of someone who means exactly what she says. Senior consultant Marcus Johnson, whose clinical instincts and field experience form the backbone of this methodology. Marcus was in the audience. He was wearing a tie which Maya had selected with authority and tied herself standing on the couch to reach, and which she'd described as the right one, without further elaboration. Bashul. He sat in that conference room and listened to his own work described back to him and felt something that he'd been afraid to feel for a long time. Not pride exactly, something more durable than pride. The feeling of having put something real into the world that would persist past the moment. That would save someone somewhere at 2 in the morning on a dark road because the person who reached them had better tools. He thought about Route 9, about the rain and the twisted guardrail and a woman gripping his wrist in the dark. He thought, it started there, all of it. That moment on a highway was the first link in a chain that runs through a boardroom and a soccer field and a Christmas dinner and a conference room in March, and it will keep running in directions I can't see from here. He thought, that's not coincidence. That's what one right choice can do. After the conference in the lobby, a physician from Chicago named Dr. Reese, a man of 60, the kind of experienced emergency doctor who had seen everything and was rarely moved by presentations, found Marcus and shook his hand and said, 22 years ago, I lost a patient on a highway outside Memphis who would have survived if anyone in the chain had known what you're describing. I've been waiting for someone to push this work into the mainstream. He held Marcus's hand a beat longer than a handshake required. Don't stop. Marcus said he wouldn't. He meant it. He called Vanessa from the lobby. How was it? She asked. Good. Really good. He found a quiet spot near the windows. A doctor from Chicago told me not to stop. Are you going to listen to him? Yeah, I think I am. Good. He could hear the smile in her voice. Maya texted me, by the way. She wants to know if the tie worked. Tell her yes. She's going to be insufferable about it. She already is. It's a feature. A pause, warm and easy, the kind that had replaced the careful, calibrated silences of the early months. The kind that didn't need filling. Marcus, she said. Yeah. I need to tell you something. Okay. I've been offered a board position. External, a nonprofit focused on corporate accountability, started by a coalition of the people who reported in cases like the one at my company. They want someone who can speak from both sides of it. A pause. An insider who chose transparency over protection. That's you, he said. I know, I'm going to take it. Another pause. But that's not what I wanted to tell you. He waited. I've been thinking about Route 9 a lot lately, she said. About that night. And I've realized I spent a long time after the accident telling myself the story of it, as I almost died, and then I didn't, and then I owed someone something. Like it was a transaction I needed to balance. She stopped. That's not what it was. No, he said. It was the beginning of something. Not the near end of something. The actual beginning. She was quiet for a moment. I just wanted to say that out loud. To you. Because you were there for the beginning, and you're here for... She stopped. For whatever this is now. He stood by the lobby windows with the phone against his ear and looked at nothing in particular and felt everything in general. Yeah, he said. I'm here. Okay. Her voice settled. Good. Now go call your daughter. She's been texting me every 20 minutes asking how the conference went. She's supposed to be in school. She's very resourceful. I know she is. He started toward the exit. Hey, Vanessa. Yeah. Thank you. For what? For holding on in that ditch. A pause. You told me to. You didn't have to listen. She was quiet for a long moment. No, she said. I didn't. Another pause, and then something underneath all the competence and the sharpness and the armor, the thing that had been making more frequent appearances since a hospital hallway with an IV pole and bad hot chocolate. I'm glad I did. He stepped outside. The March air was cold, but the light was different than it had been in November, longer with the particular quality of light that comes when the year has decided to move forward. He stood on the sidewalk outside the conference center and looked up and thought about the distance between a ditch on Route 9 and this moment, and how that distance could only be measured in choices, hers. Maya's, a woman named Angela Torres, a doctor named Sarah Mitchell, a mother with opinions about cornbread, an 8-year-old who texted from school and selected the right tie. He called Maya. She picked up immediately, which confirmed the school situation. Dad, how was it? Did the tie work? Did people clap? They clapped. The tie worked. Why are you answering your phone? It's lunch. It's 11:15 in the morning. A brief pause. Early lunch. Maya. The tie really worked. He smiled. The same smile that had started in the kitchen months ago when she'd told him she'd been waiting for him to be happy again. The one that came from somewhere that had been closed for a long time and was now reliably open. "Yeah," he said. "It really worked." "I knew it." The satisfaction in her voice was complete. "Are you coming home for dinner?" "I'll be home by 6. Vanessa, too." He looked down the street. At nothing in particular. At everything. "I'll ask her," he said. "Dad?" "Yeah." "That's not a no." "That's not a no," he agreed. "Sham." He hung up and stood on the sidewalk for another moment, his breath visible in the March cold, the city moving around him in the ordinary way of cities that don't know they're the backdrop to anything important. He thought about the man he'd been on a rainy November night on Route 9, tired doing the math on scrambled eggs, driving home from a double shift with his whole life organized around containment. Around taking up exactly the right amount of space and no more. Around surviving so thoroughly that he'd nearly forgotten what it felt like to actually live. He thought about a woman who had gripped his wrist in the dark and asked him to make it fast, not knowing she was asking him to stay. He thought about what it meant that he had. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be saved and never recognizing the moment when it happens. They imagine it arrives with music, or with certainty, or with a clarity so complete that there's no room for doubt. They miss it when it comes in the form of a stranger in the rain, or a bad cup of hot chocolate, or a child asking an honest question in a pizza booth, or a phone call at midnight from someone who already knows what she's going to do and just needs someone to stay on the line while she does it. Marcus Johnson had spent 4 years keeping himself small for reasons that were real and reasons that were fear, and he hadn't always known the difference. He knew it now. He knew it the way you know things that have been earned not as theory, but as bone-deep understanding. The kind that changes how you stand, how you answer when someone asks you how you feel, how you look at a parking lot, and understand that it's where you go when things matter. He knew that saving someone's life and changing it were two different things, and that sometimes the same person did both without meaning to. And that this was not an accident, but something more purposeful than accident. Something that required both people to make a choice, and keep making it all the way through the hard parts, and the uncertain parts, and the parts where the outcome couldn't be promised. He knew that his daughter was right about the tie. He knew that Route 9 in the rain was the first sentence of a story he was still inside, and that the story was good, and that it would keep going in directions he couldn't see from here. He put his phone in his pocket and started walking. Not toward anything he could name. Toward all of it. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was in the end the only kind of living that deserved the name.